In this video, I'm going to show you how to take your precious family heirlooms that have probably been in storage or in your attic, and you are going to take them and transform them into something gorgeous, and we're going to do it together. When I received a message from my client saying her family heirloom was in storage, they really needed it redone, can I fit it in before Christmas? I said, yes, why don't we take on this challenge? Well, when I got it into my workshop, I could see how much this thing had been in storage, put away, damaged, dinged up, probably moved a few times, and so first things first, we're gonna do the repairs. The screws on this fit really tight, and you can see just by looking at them how dated this piece is. I start each and every piece the same. I take all the hardware off, I put it in a bag, I clean the piece up, and then I can see what I'm working with. A shop vac is one of the most necessary items when you're working with furniture. While I was vacuuming all the dust and grime off of it, I noticed that the bottom pieces were not even hardly attached. Some of the nails had come up, some of them were popping through the wood, and so I knew we needed to take tiny little nails, like the kind that were already in there, and place them in, making sure to secure the bottom so that it wasn't bowing up anymore. To make sure both pieces were secured down, I probably put about 15 nails in. The goal of an antique piece like this is not to replace or modernize any of the wood, it's to preserve what's already there. And so this wood was in decent shape. There was a few water damage spots on it, but we can repair it by nailing it down and sanding it the best we can. I'm using needle nose pliers to hold the tiny nails because then I'm not going to hammer my fingers. This is the best way to put in small nails, so you're welcome for that tip. Another great way to use needle nose pliers is to get out any nails if you have to repair some of the siding. Now this piece had come off, thankfully they had saved it, because a piece like this is really hard to replicate. I don't have the tools for that. But they had saved it and put it in one of the drawers. But there was nails in it, and so you can put it on the ground, you can hammer the wood down so that the nail gets stuck on the concrete and gets popped up, and then use your needle nose pliers to pry it back out. Now we're going to fill in any ding or nail hole that's created on this, and so you don't have to worry about damaging the wood, but you do need to make sure that it's glued and put on properly. By using wood glue, we can start to attach it, and then I put one nail in to anchor it before I'm actually going to staple this on. There was a pretty good size hole for this nail already, and so using needle nose pliers and my hammer, I was able to hammer that down and then take a screwdriver to the top and then bang it the rest of the way so that it was secured. And then I used my Shore Bonder pneumatic stapler. I didn't get footage of that, but I was able to staple it on and then hammer those staples a little bit deep. It's going to make sure that it is very securely attached. And then I added wood putty on the top so that I could sand that and it's going to look completely flush. With antique pieces, I always clean them twice, but first I start with Cred Cutter, which is a cleaner and degreaser. I wipe the entire piece down, getting off all the dust and grime and making sure that it's really clean. You've seen me use TSP a lot. It's trisodium phosphate. We're going to use that after we sand. So this gets all the dust and grime off. You can see it's already deglossing it a little bit, but we're going to go through and buff sand it first. So you can use any sander that you have. I love this one. It's a surf prep sander. You can get it online, but unless you are doing this all the time, it's a pretty good investment. So you can use any sander that you can get on Amazon, Harbor Freight, anything works. I like the Surf Prep because it has foam pads and I can go over those wood details without grinding them down too much because the pad forms over any details. I'm using a medium grit. If you were using a different sander, you'd probably want to use about a 150 to sand down the veneer enough so that the primer is going to adhere really well. Now we sand it down, we don't strip it. You need to just sand it down enough so that the primer will attach and bond to the surface. But after we sand, I'm going to take hot water and TSP and make sure that we go through and we get any bit of that glossiness off. As you can see, I make a bucket of it so you can see the steam coming off of it. I like using hot water and TSP because it really allows it to dilute it and dissolve the TSP, which is literally just in a box from Lowe's, Home Depot. It's one of the cheapest products you can get for cleaning and it lasts a long time. So I mix it together in a bucket. I'm actually using my kid's Halloween bucket. And then I use a green sponge pad or any sort of scrubber, and you want to go through and get it in every crack and crevice, and then take an absorbent towel, not a microfiber one, an absorbent towel, and wipe it back off. You don't want all that water sitting on the surface. So you can already see right there, all the gloss is gone. It's going to be a matte finish, and that's going to be perfect for our primer and paint. For the primer, I'm using my favorite white shellac. Again, I know that you're not supposed to spray this. I do. Don't follow what I do. You should probably roll this on. But I prefer to spray. I have everything open. I am making sure there's nothing flammable except for the gun that I'm using next to it. But they say this does have a flash point, and so technically you don't want to spray it through an electric sprayer, but I've had no issues. So I just prefer to put it on like this. But I think my shellac had been sitting in this gun for too long because it came out way more gritty than I expected, like had little goops all over it. So I ended up having to sand it more. But also the grain on this was a little bit uneven. And so as I'm going through, I'm realizing it's got an uneven pattern to it, or it's not fully flush. And so I'm going to end up priming this twice to make sure, because this piece has some pretty heavy tannins that are going to bleed through. And we want to make sure that we seal all those in before you put any sort of paint on this. As you've probably seen on some other dressers, I typically paint with the drawers in. And then I can pull the drawers out a little bit and touch those up with a paintbrush later. But when you're working with antique pieces, the drawers fit really tight. Like they literally have one spot that they fit in the entire place, and they fit well. Because of that, you can't paint it with them in because you're going to end up scraping and the paint's going to get stuck, and so they need to be pulled out. And I love using frog tape and this paper that I can get from the hardware store, wrapping the drawers and then setting them right side up so that I can paint them. Once everything is primed and the primer has dried, I do let this sit overnight. Shellac is best when it's sat for 12 to 24 hours. I go through with my sander. I'm using a surf prep at first, but I didn't have a heavy enough grip for it. So then I got out my orbital sander. I put a 120 on it so that I can get the primer almost flush so that it's going to create a really flat surface for the paint to go on. I'm sure you guys are thinking at this point, wow, we haven't even painted it yet. Yeah, that's why this video is coming in 2 parts. So I want you to see the whole process. I want you to see that yes, it takes work, but you can restore your furniture just like I'm doing. You don't have to have all the fancy tools. You can have a regular sander and do what I'm doing. You can use a roller and shellac and do what I'm doing. But you can make sure that this furniture is preserved, especially if it's beyond restoring the wood. And so this wood veneer was beyond restoring, but also the client wanted the base painted and the top preserved. This little sander is really cute. It's like a little foam pad that you can grab. It's really comfortable for your hand, and it comes with little strips that's Velcro on. It's really good for getting in the grooves and small spaces when you don't want to take your huge sander to it because you might take off too much. After sanding, anytime you sand, you always want to go through with the shop vac, vacuum it up first before you wipe the piece down fully. And then we're going to do our second coat of primer because we popped a lot of that wood back out, and we want to make sure that that's sealed up. Fun fact, why I use 2 hands, I'm ambidextrous, so I can actually write with 2 hands at the same time, forward and backwards and mirrored, but it just works with my process sometimes using 2 hands because I can work faster. A tack cloth is like $2 at the store. It is so well worth it. After I wipe everything off with a microfiber, there's just a little bit of dust left behind. These things are really sticky. Use gloves, but going through and wiping it down before I put any more primer. The worst thing that I've seen happen is when people paint and their paint doesn't adhere, their primer's not adhering right, their finish isn't adhering right because they had too much dust on the surface or floating around. This is gray paint and primer. It's Rust-Oleum. It says 2X at the top so you can see it. You can buy Rust-Oleum at Walmart, at Lowe's. Basically, this is one of my favorite secret primers that I use. Now, I'm using gray because we're actually going through with a lighter gray over the top of this. And this gray paint and primer comes in matte. If you spray it really, really lightly, you don't have to cover everything. I'm covering the majority of the wood that I popped out. It is a great adherence to paint. If you've ever used furniture paint like Dixie Belle or Fusion or Annie Sloan and you open up a jar and it looks gritty and clumpy, oh, you have to do so much stirring. It meant that the stockist did not shake these up. They were probably sitting for way too long. This is not the most popular color, and so it's probably been on the shelf, but I strained it in a medium mesh strainer. I mixed it. I added distilled water just to get this smooth of a finish through my spray gun. Straining is everything. This is a Wagner Flexio 5000. You don't need a gun this hardcore, but if you want one, it's linked in my description, as is all the tools that I'm using. But I love this Flexio 5000 because it sprays really thick paints, no problem. They all go through this gun. I do, again, use distilled water to thin any furniture paint down. You're gonna have to thin it because it is thick, and it's usually great for blending and brushing on, but spraying it on just gives you that really smooth finish. I usually catch the majority of the repairs needed after I prime and fill those, but I didn't catch this until after my first layer of paint, and that's okay. You can go back through with some spackling, fill any of the cracks and crevices. The front of this was broken, and it just showed too much of the damage when the paint was over it, and so I went and I filled it, and then I filled another spot inside, and then I primed and painted over that. When I'm spraying, it's a little bit lighter coat, so when you're painting with a brush, you can probably get away with using 2 coats. When I'm spraying and I'm doing light coats, I usually do about 3. After I'm done, I grab my other gun. This is a HomeRite sprayer, and I put satin polyacrylic through it using a strainer as well, and then I spray a top seal coat on these pieces. These are the shelves that were inside. I have propped them up against the wall, painted both sides, and I'm going through with my seal now and making sure that they're sealed. Now, stay tuned because I've got part 2 coming. We're going to do a dark wax finish, the top. We're going to strip this thing, and it's going to be home for Christmas.